Kia ora koutou. I'd like to invite Joe, Wen, and Hayley on stage right now. Kia ora koutou. So you have sat and listened, and now it's your turn to talk and ask. I just want to quickly introduce Wen, who is the Regional Director of Enterprise Singapore. For those that don't know, that is the Singapore equivalent of NZTE. I encourage you to direct a lot of questions her way. So we have a High Commissioner, a Trade Commissioner, and a Regional Director. I've essentially just been told to sit here and smile, a bit of gender diversity up here. So please, without further ado, I'd open up to the floor for any questions. We've got a few microphones floating around. If you do have any sort of specific questions to yourself or your business, the ladies will be in and out throughout the day, so you can pull them aside. But please, to the floor.
Hi. I just want to ask, if a New Zealand company incorporates in Singapore, does it automatically give access to the other Asian countries to do business?
Straight to you. Sure. I think when you incorporate in Singapore, it doesn't, when you look about direct access, it means that because we are very connected to the regional countries, and we do have quite a good mix of people, of the different Southeast Asian people living in Singapore. So when we talk about the direct access, it's actually you get to know a little bit more about what Southeast Asia, the different markets, their eating habits, their consumption. I mean, even if you go to Singapore, you realize that you cross the bridge, you go into Malaysia, they may have a different sets of living, their consumption behavior may be different, the way they do business is different. But the point is, when you're in Singapore, you're just an hour drive away from Malaysia, and that that immediately opens up the knowledge that you have to and the ability for you to learn a little bit more about Malaysia. And then another 2.5 hour, 3 hour flight away, you're in Thailand, you're in Vietnam, you get to know a little bit more about this country, you get to know a little bit about how these people behave, how products get off the shelf, what kind of products go on the shelf. So when we talk about access, it's not that just because I'm in Singapore, I'll be able to the Vietnamese will recognize my company and so on and so on. It's not that not in that sense, but it's more in the sense that you now have access to all this market a lot faster, and you're able to know a little bit more about what they do. And at the same time, I think because Singapore is a common transit point for actually a lot of tourists coming from the Southeast Asia region as well. So when your product is happens to be on Singapore shelves, it also means that as this crowd passes through Singapore as one of the checkpoints to the other Southeast Asian market, they actually get to see your product, and there's some kind of top of mind recall when they go back to their products. And so it's more of that kind of information and the kind of flow that kind of like opens up the opportunity to the region.
Hi, Bernard Delray from Capital Preferences. First, thanks for all the support NZT and Singapore have given to us. Can you speak a little bit to the capital investments that Singaporean investors or other investors are making into New Zealand, and then just what the plans are there, given we have some capital constraints for new ventures here in New Zealand, or businesses that are founded in New Zealand?
Sure, thank you. I guess the purpose of today was more around that trade side, although throughout the day today you're going to learn more about that topic, so I recommend that you stay and hear a bit more from that. But I'm also happy to open that up to any of the team at MAS if they want to make a response to that question.
Hi. I think the question is, you want to raise more capital for your firm. Okay. Okay, so I think, yes, Singapore has been a hub for raising capital for a lot of tech firms. I was able to share in my opening remarks, but given this opportunity, let me share something on the numbers. 2015, when we started our FinTech strategy, the total amount of money raised by tech firms based in Singapore was close to $20–25 million. Today, we are going to close this year close to $1 billion. So that's in 4 years' time, the rate of growth of capital being raised out of Singapore by tech firms with either headquarters in Singapore or regional offices in Singapore. So a huge opportunity to raise money out of Singapore. We have created a platform called Deal Day, which every Friday there's a place where you go and raise capital. So it's called Friday Deal Day. So if you are in Singapore, if you happen to one of the Fridays, just knock in either MAS or Enterprise Singapore. They'll tell you which place to go in a Friday and raise capital. It's so easy.
Thank you.
Down the back.
Hi, John Nicholson from Aviation New Zealand. Singapore Defence last year looked at establishing a fighter squadron in New Zealand. Are there any positives or negatives? So we know they didn't. Are there any positives or negatives from that we should be aware of in looking at Singapore in future?
Yes, Honu's just passing it to me. So for an initial response, I'm just trying to think how you would define positives and negatives. We looked the government here looked really closely at what the opportunities might be and how feasible options for doing that might be. And in the end, reached a conclusion that the business case didn't stack up, and Singapore agreed with that. The only options that could be pursued were pretty expensive ones. Singapore is using training, grounds in Australia and in the United States, and there may be somewhere else, I think, but certainly in the US and Australia for its Air Force training. But I think that the two messages I would give are, first of all, that the defence relationship between New Zealand and Singapore remains very strong. And secondly, we are looking and would always be looking for other opportunities to collaborate with Singapore in ways that help them in the defence front. I don't know if anyone from the Southeast Asia Division wants to add anything to that. Andrew Needs.
We're really, just to reiterate, my name's Andrew Needs. I'm head of the South and Southeast Asia Division in Foreign Affairs and Trade. Yeah, I think when you look at Singapore and all the things that the team were talking about with regard to Singapore and why it has so many suitors, is it's that classic entrepot position, fantastic for trade, but it is also the thing that makes it strategically very vulnerable, and Singapore is really aware of that vulnerability in a region that is becoming a more contested space strategically. And so the flip side of that is New Zealand is a long way from anywhere with lots of open spaces. So we are, we have a lot of reasons to work together, both for historical reasons, but also for practical strategic reasons now. So I think that's just to reinforce your point, Joe, that while that very, very big deal around the potential for the bigger air connection has not happened, it remains a compelling narrative with regard to maintain that close defence relationship.
Yeah, and I do believe there will be other opportunities to build on the current arrangements we have, which are around artillery training here primarily.
Hi. Mike Linsky from Aspect. Hayley knows who we are. We've been providing services to the Civil Aviation Authority in Singapore for over 10 years now. We do that sort of remotely, and we've been very successful in expanding those services, but I'll be interested in Chong's view on how we could be more successful in government sectors. Would it be helpful if we had an on-site presence in Singapore? What's the view on that?
I think we had a chat with Hayley earlier as well. I was telling her that the best way, to really find out more about the country and to know, to kind of like do more business in the country, nothing beats having a presence on the ground so that, it's because when you are there, it's so easy for you to just meet anyone. I'm sure we can do, things like video call, teleconference. I do a lot of that because I'm actually based out in Sydney. But there's really nothing, beats having a physical presence in the country, going down to the person, meeting the person face to face and establishing the relationship. I think building on the point that Hayley mentioned earlier, we are a westernized country, but we are not a Western country. To us, I think in Singapore, a lot of times, I think a lot of relationship really, a lot of business still builds on relationship. It gets things started. It may not get you the contract in the end, but it gets things started. It allows you to have the opportunity to have that conversation, and then allow your credentials, and the quality of your work, to speak for itself thereafter. So if I would definitely welcome you to set up a presence in Singapore, and then also not just because you want to set up a presence in Singapore for the Singapore market, but really look at setting up a presence in Singapore for the regional market. Singapore market is way too small. 5.6 million. There's probably so much contracts you can do. But look outside. Just within 5-hour flight, you have 640 million. Economy to tap on. So I think that's really something that I would like the audience to consider as well.
Oh yeah. Hey, firstly, thank you for the heroic work you're doing in Singapore on behalf of New Zealand, to the New Zealanders. I was fortunate to be in the meeting yesterday with SOP and was struck by the refreshing honesty he has around innovation and the challenges, and especially for startups working with corporates and governments. And what's come through this morning loud and clear is that the private-public collaboration that goes on in Singapore is you've kind of thrown the book out the window and in doing some really interesting things, and the place you've got in the world you don't take for granted, and you're going for it. And it does feel really hard in New Zealand to do that. Government, there's procurement rules and all the rest of it, and we kind of get in our own way. And so firstly from Chong, I'm just interested in how you created that environment for collaboration, and then from the Kiwis, how do we bring that example down here and help our sort of public sector, the MBs and the government to kind of follow that example?
I think for us, right from the start, we know that government resources are very limited. So there's only so much that we can do. So we believe in this thing we call the multiplier effect. We work with one partner. So imagine one of me, I can work with 10 companies. If I work with the other multiplier, the other multiplier can work with another 10 companies, and the effect goes on. And with that, you can actually reach out to a wider community and a wider ecosystem. So we started actually, looking at public service in a way. How can we better, leverage our partnerships with the corporate partners? How can we work closer with the trade association, the Chamber of Commerce, and get them to join us in our initiative? Actually, a lot of this, comes down to actually the amount of engagement work that you actually do with the industry, and the amount of engagement work that you actually reach out to your stakeholder. We mentioned a little bit about the industrial transformation map. I was personally involved in actually setting up one of the transformation map for the food industry. It was actually a 1.5-year journey, and what we did is we actually went down to the corporates, each and individual one of them, to actually get them their feedback. If I were to do this for the industry, what does it mean to you? How do you see this industry grow in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, and where do you think you could actually contribute to this part if we were to come up with this plan? We also spend a lot of time cultivating relationship with the association, with the chambers, asking them the same thing. If I were to come up with this plan, where do you think your role is? Where do you think you need to improve on? Where are the capability gaps, and where do you think the government can come in? So we let them have a say, so that they feel that they are part of this plan. And at the same time, we tell them that you will not be doing this on your own. The government will come together with you, and we will partner you along this journey. And so, that's how we kind of like put together this plan and give the private sector the kind of a little bit of like a empowerment and authority to feel that they are actually part of this entire development plan. Yeah, and I guess that's how we get things started. Yeah.
And I think I would add that the way in which the enhanced partnership has been drawn up, involving, as I said, some 20 government agencies on each side, the basis for a lot of that partnership or collaboration or whatever it might be is using different techniques to learn from each other, around best practice, information exchanges, people-to-people exchanges in a whole range of different sectors. And I would hope and expect that, and it's never a one-way street. It's always easy to see the flaws in your own system and the things that work wonderfully somewhere else. But I think it's quite clear that each of us, Singapore and New Zealand, have different things we can learn from each other. It's often not possible for a system that has been developed and works really well in Singapore, which as a city-state can do things somewhat differently. It's often not possible for it to be exactly replicable in New Zealand, and probably the same in reverse. But you can certainly draw lessons and hopefully solve some problems or overcome blockages that might be there. The other thing, of course, is to make sure that those who are in decision-making capacities fully understand the blockages, the problems they need to find solutions to.
If I could just add on one more point, when we were developing some of our industry transformation map, we do look to New Zealand as well for best practices. So I mean, there are just so much to learn from each other.
I think, thank you. Sorry, I just want to add to that as well. So this is my view, not necessarily the view held by NZTE. And that is, we are a little bit guilty of loving to start up another industry body or another committee or another. I really would say, from a private sector context, is before you open something else up, who else is doing what you want to do and how can you work together? Because I find a lot in market that we think we're each other's competitors. We're not. We're only each other's competitors in New Zealand. When we go to the market, we stand stronger together than we do apart. And I think there's really something about the collaboration, and don't wait for the government to tell you to do something. I mean, it is just about being a little bit smarter. We don't have to lead everything. We don't have to lead new groups. I think we can collaborate a lot more across all sectors. I have to be honest, I think tech just does this naturally because I think we never really are a full part of the whole, we're not the whole solution. So I think the food and beverage sectors could learn a lot from the tech sector. So what are we doing to work together? When you're going to market, who else is going to market? When you want to show some sort of knowledge or something unique that you've done in the market, who else are you joining with? We do really simple things like eco calls. We get the economic development boards and Kiwi Landing Pad and NZ Tech. If we're doing anything, in Callaghan, we just set up a call. I wouldn't say that we haven't created anything amazing, but we just kind of talk about what we're doing, and I think there should be a little bit more of that in New Zealand, and we need a few more crazy dancers. If anyone's seen that video, that can kind of lead the way. Let's kind of start working a bit closer together, because we can be quite siloed as a culture, and it gets us so far, but it doesn't get us to the next step. So.
Good morning. The Minister talked about the focus on digital economy, and you talked about it as well, Joe. As part of the DEPA, are you considering the currency of a digital economy, which we call cryptocurrencies? Is there a move to look at a sovereign cryptocurrency, or are we going to leave it to Google to rule the world on that?
I can't answer for sure on that one, but my understanding is no.
Sorry, and why not?
Because I don't believe that is going to be possible to, it wouldn't be possible to achieve that within the time frame we're talking about. And I think for the other thing to think about is that Pathfinder agreements aim to set rules and standards where they need to be set, particularly to overcome barriers to trade. But do so in a way that would encourage and enable others who are able to meet those same standards to apply. So I'm not participating directly in the negotiations on DEPA. I am completely unaware of it looking at cryptocurrencies or sort of a sovereign currency. I think it's got enough on its plate already, quite frankly.
Any more questions? I guess I've got one for Horan. What sort of trends are you seeing from businesses coming into Singapore, whether from New Zealand or sort of your Oceania remit or even further abroad that your colleagues are seeing as well?
Right. I think some of the key areas that I think that we are looking at, I mean, with more interest, I think some of them are already covered, I mean, across Joe's and Hayley's speech. So the area of smart city climate change, that's something that I think we are looking at it quite intensely. I think this year, during our National Day rally, our Prime Minister also gave a very long explanation on the need to really look into solutions that can actually help us to combat climate change. So things like how, because the thing is, the weather keeps changing. Singapore is getting hotter. So whether there are any solutions that can actually help to combat. But the thing is, we have to deal with what the weather gives us, but what are some of the changes that we can do in urban planning that could actually make our life a lot easier, a lot more bearable? So solutions around that area will definitely be helpful. In the area of related to climate change sustainability, we are also looking into area like agri-tech development, food tech development, into things like food waste, reducing food waste valorization. So these are all plastic waste reduction and valorization. So these are all areas that, I mean, we are starting to look into because of the long-term planning that we want to, in view of what is to come. And then also in the other area is actually the point on Industry 4.0, specialized manufacturing. We're looking at, future mobility. We are talking about, if we are having an aging population, workforce dynamics is going to change. So how can we then prepare ourselves, when the workforce starts to age, we may not be, certain kind of functions of work may not be easily available. How can we then replace with other forms? How can business process be changed? So I 4.0 AI is also another area that we are looking at. FinTech definitely is one. I'll leave it to Tyndall to share a little bit more. And then perhaps the other area that we're also looking a little bit more is actually in the area of health tech. So I mean, we talk about how can we, I mean, with the population aging, how can we actually look at, providing better care for everyone, for the aging population, at the same time, keeping it affordable. So that would be another area that I think we are also seeing some interest in.
Yeah. Oh, just adding, I guess, to the climate change focus. That has been, it's really risen very, very much higher and very quickly up the Singapore agenda. And as Horan indicated, Prime Minister Lee, in his major annual speech, spent a lot of time talking about that. Singapore is thinking ahead about 100 years, preparing for worst-case scenarios in terms of sea level rise, and it hasn't got a hell of a lot of land in the first instance, so it would be a little bit devastating for it to lose any of the land it has. So part of that planning involves, well, actually, there has been collaboration with the Netherlands using the Netherlands polder technology. They're looking at spending probably $100 billion Singapore over the course of these next decades to try and shore up and protect Singapore's coastline. But there's also a whole pile of really interesting new technologies, and I think an enormous amount of research money is likely to be spent on those technologies to help. So, for example, they're looking at BIPV, so building integrated photovoltaic. The BPV was correct. So building integrated photovoltaic, so that the panels of the whole building are solar enabled. Because, of course, your roof is only a small part of the building. If you can integrate PV into the sides of the building as well, as the sun moves through the course of the day, you've got a much better chance of capturing more solar energy. And similarly, doing other things like building PV systems out over water reservoirs, which has, again, a kind of a double advantage of the solar panels producing the energy, but also preventing the water underneath from evaporating. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. Like us, they are focusing on transport, a lot on building out public transport, massive build of the MRT, the Rapid Transit System internally. But Mr. Dyson, the UK inventor, is moving to Singapore in a couple of years. He's bought an extremely expensive penthouse and is setting up a electric car factory there. So it is a place that attracts innovation, finds solutions, but wants to work with partners in finding those solutions. And I think in many, many of those areas, we are definitely, kind of natural partners.
And on climate change, I guess it's worth noting there's a strong theme in this year's FinTech Festival on climate change, so it's fantastic. Yes, sorry.
Hi there, you're just going back to deeper. There seems to be a big e-commerce focus on that. But what are the other practical opportunities, do you think, for other aspects of FinTech in selling deeper?
Not sure I can answer those in any great detail because, as I said, not directly involved in the negotiations. There is on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade's website some material about the DEPA that is probably about as much as I'm going to be able to impart to you today. But yeah, as both the Minister and I said, this builds on the e-commerce chapters that are kind of now a traditional part of free trade agreements. But some of the new areas that it's looking into are definitely around things like artificial intelligence and so on. But beyond that, I'm afraid I haven't got enough information to be able to do anything other than probably put you totally astray. Is there anyone else in the room who's...
Can I just add a little bit, not about that because I'm not an expert. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that when there's any public consultations around this, I highly recommend you go along. I know that there's going to be some in New Zealand and there'll be more information on the website on that, but that's... And the reason I wanted to interrupt and say that is that's where we can play, that's where we can share. If there's something I've learned about being in the public sector, coming from a private sector background, is these opportunities are actually open to come in and help shape these types of opportunities. So I highly recommend that. Sorry.
And it is also worth noting that it is a live and evolving agreement as well. So, sorry.
Yeah, my question might sort of follow on a little bit from that. The Minister said this morning with emerging technology comes new challenges and new barriers, especially across border. But if you look at the launch from the FCA back in April of last year when they launched the Global Innovation Network, which MAS is actually a part of, and I think there's only 12 regulators at this point in time which actually have signed up to it. MAS have also launched, obviously, the Sandbox Express, so you get 21 days to turn it around, and you can sit in there for 9 months and play with your new toys. Is there any discussion with the New Zealand government, because the FMA is quite strong in their stance around we don't necessarily need a sandbox here in New Zealand. They've got very much an open door policy. But I'm just wondering through some of the conversations that you've been having, whether that's been explored for New Zealand actually to take a bit more of a stance in that area.
We haven't had.
I can answer it from NZT's perspective. So today is a really important day to begin those conversations and not begin but continue on. I think the monetary authority being here is the stepping stone to say, hey, I'm up for these conversations. We have a lot to learn from Singapore. Again, do we need to do it ourselves? Opinion of mine, I'm not sure. Or do we just collaborate with those that are already doing it? Do we build bridges so it's easier for us to work inside each other's markets in the sandbox context? I think today is a really, really important day for us to have those conversations. And not just have conversations, but what do we leave with today that we can action? Because if there's anything I've learned from Singaporean culture is we can have a quick chat, but let's go and do something. So, I mean, that from my view, from an NZTE point of view, I'd certainly want to learn more today on what we can be doing, but from deeper or anything else, I think let's let it unfold. And I think we've got Callaghan here today, we've got NZTE, we've got MFAT. We've got other agencies, and I'm sorry if I've forgotten you that you're here. Look, today is a really, really important day to continue on, not just that conversation, but others.
Thank you.
Hey, g'day. I wanted to ask a question around data science. So I want to understand your views on the value you think the New Zealand market could add to Singapore, if we have any particular competitive advantage at a high level.
Look at us all going, hey, how about I start on that? Did you want to? Okay, you've got a data scientist here, Guru.
Oh, fantastic.
Data science has any?
Oh, crikey, immense. Where do I begin? Well, look, fundamentally, from a data, I always kind of try and avoid using the word data science because it's like, show me a scientist that doesn't use data. So I'm just going to use AI in a kind of ubiquitous term associated with it. Well, fundamentally, it's really a combination or aggregation of several factors coming together. Obviously, from an investment point of view, because there is an experimentation and trial aspect of it, we don't know all the answers up front. Secondly is the data and having an ecosystem that allows you that facilitation of data. In fact, we'll be talking about more of that later. From a regulatory point of view, the encouragement, and then finally having the accessibility to both the technology, the talent, and so forth. So there's immense opportunity, possibility, trialing and testing things out and seeing effectively how, well, at the end of the day, and actually in the same theme of sustainability, I'm actually extending it also to inclusion. We are facilitating and developing these underlying solutions and products for that purpose, at the same time maintaining in the back end and assuring that exclusion or adverse effects do not occur.
I think the opportunity when it comes to data science in the space of FinTech is growing a lot in Singapore now. In fact, when I looked at our portfolio, we have close to now 700 plus FinTech companies in Singapore, and large part of data FinTechs are working with legacy infrastructure, trying to unwind those data trapped on those legacy systems, and how do we convert the data through APIs and create more partnership with different solutions, and that being the booming part of the whole data business, what we see out of Singapore. So if you are in the business of unwinding, extracting data from legacy system, come to Singapore. There's a huge opportunity out there.
Thank you.
Well,
just to I guess add another point on that. I said in my speech that data science was the second of the two areas of initial focus under the Science and Innovation Agreement we have between New Zealand and Singapore. So I think the first step from New Zealand's point of view was to try and get our internal house in order. When we see this collaborative relationship with Singapore as being a really good opportunity to help develop the data science capability for New Zealand, for it to be world-class and dynamic. I indicated that there are about to be a couple of technical workshops. So the first technical workshop will be on the data science research program. It'll be held in Singapore at the end of October. So for that workshop, MB has selected 12 researchers skilled in areas applicable to data science to participate in that workshop. There were apparently quite a high number of applications, which was really pleasing. Then off the back of that technical workshop, the plan is to finalise, I guess, the terms of reference and to go out with a call for proposals in about February next year, February 2020. The New Zealand government does intend to commit up to $4 million per annum for 5 years to support New Zealand engagement in this multidisciplinary joint research program on data science with Singapore. So there will be opportunities very much so in the very near future.
Yeah, I just almost skipped my mind. I thought David will speak about it. One of the challenges for data-based data companies are where they should process the data. And I think progressively, what we're seeing, more countries are going to bilaterally collaborate. And we hope that through a process of discussion, between Singapore and New Zealand, we can build some trusted data corridor, which allows data company to run analytics right out of New Zealand for corporates around ASEAN market. And if that's possible only through some kind of bilateral data corridor agreements between two countries. So that could be one of the way to look at in future how to promote data science more as a opportunity from New Zealand to be exported to different markets. And that has been a constraint for last few years. A lot of data companies just couldn't scale because they're restricted by country regulation where you can process the data, and that kind of subscales their ability to export that particular technology. But good news, yesterday I was sharing, Indonesia has reversed its policy on data. They're telling private companies can process data outside Indonesia, which is a significant policy change given among all ASEAN market, Indonesia has the biggest opportunity to use data for their own economic transformation. I don't know whether I promoted Indonesia, but that's what it is.
Awesome. Thank you all. I have a screen in front of me which is blaring, time is up in red. So if we have any last comments, if not, then we will. No. Thank you all for participating today, and thank you to our three panellists today for imparting your wisdom. They'll be here in and out most of the day, and certainly at the cocktail reception tonight. So please pull them aside at your bill. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora. Thank you.